3 years is 3 years. If the repair is not repaired, another 3 years will pass. The truck rear axle that was originally broken in 2 halves can be restored to normal use after the repair master's shaky operation. How did they do it? The truck rear axle in front of us just broke again, when there was no suitable spare parts. The owner could only come to the old-fashioned repair shop of the uncle with glasses in Beishawa. For the repair masters, repairing this kind of truck rear axle is also a piece of cake, because this rear axle has been repaired before. A steel plate for reinforcement has been installed on the outside. In order to facilitate the handling of the broken position, the master needs to cut off the steel plate for reinforcement. Although his cutting speed is not slow at all, the steel plate on the side has been cut off very quickly. Next, in order to restore the cracked position to normal, the master needs to use the gap to cut the cracked part first. The purpose of doing this is just to cut out the gap, so as to improve the overall firmness of the welding part later. After careful cooperation, the master quickly finished the treatment. As for the details of the correction of the crack, the master found a jack and then a bunch of iron chains. After that, the master used the skilled binding technique to quickly fix the jack at the cracked position of the rear axle. In this way, the master can use the lack of heating to prevent the rear axle from cracking. The master only needs to apply pressure through the jack. The deformed position has been basically restored through tacit cooperation. At the same time, in order to prevent the overall concentricity of the rear axle from deviating, we also need to use scratches. After rotating the rear axle to measure the concentricity, there is no problem. Then, the joint can be simply welded by electric welding. After welding one side firmly, the master can remove the jack used for correction. Then they need to use a scraper to make detailed measurements to prevent the rear axle from deforming due to stress. After the master found that there was no problem with the concentricity after testing, it only takes this welding process for the 8th level welder. It is relatively simple and very skilled. In order to improve the firmness of the rear axle, Master Fu also needs to use steel paper to mark the cracked position. Then use the gap in the chair to cut out the window. Then the master does this. First, he carefully welds the cracked part on the inside, and then puts a steel plate inside for reinforcement. This fixing method is only to increase the overall firmness of the rear axle, so that the car owner can use it with peace of mind. After the inner side is welded, the cut window can be repaired. Because the steel plate cut before has cracked the master himself, the way to repair the window is also quite simple. Master Fu only needs to use electric welding to perform detailed welding. The welding process is a piece of cake for an 8th level welder. After a very white-faced operation, the cracked position of the rear axle has been repaired. In order to improve the overall firmness of the rear axle, the steel plate will be used for reinforcement. First, he uses a sledgehammer to knock and shape the steel plate. For the position where the arc is not well controlled, we only need to use a saw to process the line position. Ensure the clearance between the steel plate and the rear axle. Then you can use electric welding to fix it. The welding master has fixed one side of the plate quickly through skilled operation. Then you can use furniture to limit the other side. For the position where the gap is not suitable, you need to use a sledgehammer to knock and shape it. After ensuring that there is no problem with the gap, you can then use electric welding to weld. The process of adding steel plates is very easy. After a lot of work by experienced maintenance masters, the heavy rear axle is finally repaired. After that, they only need to use the angled die machine to carefully polish the welding position. After watching the entire maintenance process, what do you think of their maintenance skills? If there are 10 points, how many points are you willing to give?